This is House Planning Help episode 68. Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're looking to self-build or retrofit. I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century. My personal goal is to create an energy-efficient home before I turn 40 in August 2016. And coming up in this podcast, I chat to Dusty Gedge, the founder of livingroofs.org, and we're going to look at whether green roofs are that different from any other roof that you might want to install. I wanted to give you a quick update behind the scenes first of all. I'm conducting some interviews, not the interviews that we do for the podcast, but these are private interviews in terms of just assessing whether the website is delivering, whether the podcast is delivering, and what more we can do. Are there resources that are needed that perhaps we could create as well? So I've selected a few people, some who are on our email newsletter and others who've been in contact via email, and I feel like right at the core of enjoying and getting the most out of what we're doing so far. So hopefully we can hone it a bit in the coming months. I know I always want more self-builders to get involved in the podcast, but I find it very tricky actually to meet them because it's much easier. The circles that I mix in are quite often architects and builders, which is great. But I always want to show that flip side too. So maybe you are someone who's embarking on a project or you feel you've learnt something that you can share. We always would want to hear from you as well. And there's a contact form on the website at houseplanninghelp.com. Let's get into today's interview. It's with Dusty Gedge, who is the current president of the European Federation of Green Roof Associations. He's also the founder of livingroofs.org, as I mentioned in the introduction. He's got lots of experience. He's done far more than that. He'll give us his update in a moment. What I found fun about this one, I always like to record on location wherever possible. And we went to a house that architect John Broome had designed. This is some years ago. Lovely house with this green roof, as you might hope for this interview. And it was tipping down with rain, so it actually was very green in colour for this too. Perfect setting. I've set the scene. I first asked Dusty how he came to focus on this area.
Well, it's quite simple. I was involved in an ornithological study of a neighbourhood of southeast London way back 20 years ago, and we found a rare bird. And they were going to build on these sites, so we decided, why don't we put the habitat on top of the roof? And of course, we were just a bunch of anarchists, ecologists, working, all suddenly coming face to face with the built environment professionals like architects and engineers and things like that, who said you couldn't do it. So I went out and found out how I could do it. I went to Switzerland and I came back, and over the last 20 years, I've become sort of recognised as a bit of a UK European world authority on it. But it was only because of willfulness and a bird.
What exactly is a green or living roof?
Well, a green roof is basically, in terms of a living green roof, is basically vegetation and soil on the roof. And that is fundamentally what it is. It's not painted green, it's not copper, it's vegetation and soil. And there's different types of green roofs, but in the main, the kind of green roofs most people are interested in terms of a small building, a house or a shed, what technically are called extensive green roofs. And essentially they're quite thin. They're only about 4 to 6 inches down to 2 inches.
When you think about a green roof, let's take a new build to begin with. What have you got to bear in mind? Is it things like climate and the strength of the roof and what it can take us through that process?
Well, there's 3 basic principles of any green roof on whatever building it is. A roof mustn't collapse, a roof mustn't leak, and in a green roof context, you must be able to get the water that falls on the roof off the roof when there's too much.
Oh, I like that. Incredibly concise. So what are the benefits? Why are we having a green roof? Sometimes I look at it and I think, this isn't a gimmick, is it? What are the reasons we're doing this?
Well, I mean, 20 years ago, people thought I was nuts and my colleagues were nuts, and now we have a policy in London, because the main reason we have a policy in London, I'm just using London as an example, is because for a lot of cities and urban areas in temperate climates, we've got lots of issues with climate change. And the three things with green roofs that are beneficial in terms of climate change is, first of all, we're getting these very, very intense summer rainfall storms, which cause causing flash floods. We've had a few this summer already. So if you've got soil and vegetation up on a roof, that can slow the amount of rainwater and the rate that rainwater leaves the roof, which it can take up to 4 or 5 hours for the roof to even start draining, which can ameliorate against flash floods. The other one for cities and urban areas generically is we're having a lot of urban heat island effects and a lot of heat excesses. So vegetation and soil evapotranspirates, and therefore that can help cool the city. Now, the sub bit to that is because they evapotranspirate in periods of heat excesses where buildings can get quite hot, especially in cities, you know, the ambient temperature can increase and it can become very uncomfortable. Having a vegetation and soil level can keep buildings incredibly cool. Now, we know, not only anecdotally, we know practically that also in the winter, particularly in dry winters, when you've got soil and vegetation on there, it's an extra thermal mass, so it's insulation. Now, the issue technically for building scientists is when the green roof is wet in the winter, it isn't a great insulator because it's wet. But most people who have a green roof actually say their fuel bills are significantly cut in the winter. But I have to do this technically, and because the building scientists won't accept the insulation value of a green roof because of the wet in the winter.
And it never freezes?
It could freeze if you was in somewhere like Scotland where you get very, very heavy frosts. You may get permafrost. I mean, certainly in the Canadian mid-Canada, they do freeze. It's not an issue. You get permafrost, and when it does freeze, it actually acts as insulation. So that's not a technical issue. It's just an issue of maybe the plants can't survive if you've chosen the wrong plants. That gets into horticultural issues then.
Let's talk about the plants, because I have an extension which is a single story. It's a terrible job, really. The roof was put in at the wrong pitch, so the lowest possible tile I've always been told is about 12 degrees, and this roof is at 6.5. So we've had leaks the whole way along, and it just suddenly popped into my mind as we're redoing this, could we put a green roof on it? And so my one concern in all of this is maintenance, that if we ever came to rent out this property, what maintenance do you need for a green roof?
Well, maintenance is always a very, very interesting subject. The type of green roofs that, I really promote, and my colleague John, who I work with and have written this online guide on, is that, we're trying to get relatively natural systems up on the roof, which should be relatively self-maintaining. Now, the issue there is if you get a very, very long, hot summer, you're going to have a brown roof. And this is what happens. There's a big brown roof near here, which is John's house, which it suffers quite badly in the droughts. But if you're relatively relaxed about it looking like that, then it's fine. Now, the other important thing I always say about maintenance is when we talk about maintenance is really in the back of the mind of most people is that, if I don't maintain it, it could harm my building. Now, the issue with maintenance on any roof, and I do roofs now, is all drainage outlets and gullies and guttering on any building, commercial housing, social housing, private housing, should every year be checked to make sure that they're free of vegetation and soil. So actually, basically, the maintenance of a green roof is normal maintenance. The issue with the plants and soils is if you want it to look highly decorative, you want to treat it like a garden, then you're going to maintain it like a garden. Now, in reality, 98% of people who put a green roof up never maintain it. And that is the reality. Buying into the idea that the roof is going to change. But then we get into a technical issue, or it's a decision-making issue. Because now green roofs, partly through people like me, have become quite mainstream, the main issue for the built environment professions, who are not interested in the soil and the vegetation because they're built environment people, is so often commercially the way that green roofs go is to try and make them light and as thin as possible, because that works for the architect and for the engineer. And so what we do is you have a lot of these very, very thin, lightweight systems which are being sold commercially. They're not bad, but they're broadcast often as significantly low maintenance. Well, they're so thin and so shallow that when we get droughts, you need to irrigate those things nearly every day. So if you're a self-built person, or you've got a shed, or you've got an outhouse that you fancy doing, what you've got to keep your mind away from is not light. What do you want? Because if what you want is a relatively self-sustaining, pretty wildflower-rich, with some sedums, then that's the decision that you take. That's what you want. And then what you have to do is you have to say, well, if I'm stripping off my roof and redoing it, how can I make that roof a little bit stronger? So I put a little bit of my money into making it stronger. And to be honest, most small extensions, you're only doubling up the rafters. And probably, if in your case you've got tiles, so you've got no wood deck. Well, if you put the wood deck on, a marine ply deck on there, you've already given it lateral strength. So let's say you've got an extension, hypothetically, where you've got a 4x2 joist, probably, let's say there are 600 mil centres, yeah? Well, what you say to yourself, what I'll do is I'll just actually put in a series of 4x2s at 300 mil centres, yeah? And essentially, and this is not technically correct, but it's a flippant way of saying, what I'm going to do is I'm going to design this roof so I can park a Mini on top of it, yeah? And really, let's say you've got a small extension, maybe 10 metres long, and you've got to put in 10 extra joists. Well, really, in terms of a budget, it's not a lot of money, really. Yeah, it's a bit of work. And then you put your marine deck down, and then you ply down, and then you put a waterproofing level on it. And John Broom, who we were talking about earlier, we took this from him, and he's a friend of ours, is you don't really need a high-end proper waterproofing treatment. Essentially, for the self-build, which is the Walter Siegel method of waterproofing, is you can use a pond liner, because a pond liner is actually a waterproofing treatment. And the great thing about a pond liner is you can get it prefabricated how you want it from the pond lining manufacturer, and it rolls up, and you lay it, and you loose lay it. So there's no sticking, no technical, heavy waterproofing. Now, if you want added confidence, you could use a Sarnafil or a single ply or whatever, and then you get your specialist contractor to come in and do all that, yeah? But in terms of the green roof element, you want to make sure that all they're doing is their waterproofing. And then they may want to sell you the layer that protects the waterproofing or the pond liner from impact when you're putting the green roof up, which is normally a puncture-resistant geotextile. I mean, there's a few technical HDLs and things like that, which is too difficult to go into in a podcast. But essentially, once that waterproofing is protected, then you can put your soils and your vegetation on. And for us, particularly in terms of the self-build, because a lot of people who are in the self-build world want to be relatively sustainable. And so there are lots of nonsense products in the green roof industry world. And if you can put your roof on a slight pitch, it's really quite amazing. Even a slight pitch, water does run downhill, because we get into this issue of how do you drain water off a roof when there's too much. So for the commercial industries, we've had all these special products, which really quite a few of us think are slightly dubious anyway, yeah. So the way we try to say is think creatively about how you can drain your roof. There's a roof just above us where we're sitting here, which is a great example of it. If you used to go up onto this roof, you'll see all these low mounds of soil, and then you'd see these valleys, which are basically filled with shingle, which are about 20 mil, which are dry riverbeds. So when there's too much rainwater, that dry riverbed, which meanders through the soil, takes it to the outlet and drains the roof, yeah? So you can cut out a lot of plastic and a lot of stuff that is said necessary conventionally, and it's called convention, because we have guidelines and standards, yeah? But it's actually, the only convention is a roof must drain at 2 litres per square metres per second. I know all this because being the president, And essentially, as long as you're being creative, as long as I know how that water gets to that outlet, then why do I have to use all this complicated engineered stuff? And so once you've got this geotextile on, you've got your dry riverbeds, then you put your soils on. We don't really call them soils. We call them substrates or growing mediums. And generally, they're nearly 80% like a brick or a stone or an aggregate, and only about 20% organic. Because on a roof, and I've just paused there, a lot of people, when they imagine a green roof, and it's the term, is they think, oh, yeah, I'm going to have this really nice grass, bright green roof, yeah? Well, really, in a drought, grass goes brown. And the best green roofs are really ones which are flower-rich. Now, flowers, strangely enough, and the gardeners won't like me for this, flowers really do best where there's as little topsoil as possible in a natural environment. So what you do is you have a substrate which is really, really poor in organic material, because the grasses don't like that so much and the wildflowers prefer that. And so what you'll find is often those wildflowers are much able to suffer the droughts and the changes in our weather. And therefore they're more resilient, which is a big term in terms of sustainability. So you've got this brick-based or aggregate-based substrate up there, and then you can seed and plant your plants and add your sedums. Now, I've said sedums twice because I'm sure many of your listeners, if they're interested in green roofs, have gone out there and gone, oh, I need a sedum roof. Well, that's partly the product of the commercial construction industry desiring a lightweight system to meet the building science, yeah?
How many different things can you have on your roof?
Well,
it's just endless. You could have your flower bed up there.
You could have your flower bed up there, but that's when you get into maintenance and you probably need a much stronger roof. That's where you're really loading it, and that's what we get into what we call an intensive roof garden process. You could do that, but you really need to be really strong. Most people aren't going to go to that level, to be honest. If you want a food grow, you're in the same process. Yeah, you've got to make a much stronger roof. But the point what I'm trying to make is it's what they call the rockery alpine community that we kind of really use on a green roof. And sedums, sempervivums, a lot of the wildflowers you'll see along the edge of roadsides in the United Kingdom, if you go to chalk grass, and all those flowers are appropriate, yeah? And they're tough, hardy plants that can deal with stress. Because at the end of the day, most people who want a green roof aren't gardeners, and even the gardeners won't want to go up on the green roof. So what you want to put up there is something that's relatively self-sustaining. But the thing why I bring up this thing about sedums, you don't need a sedum roof. What you need is a roof that is full of flowers that are appropriate to a green roof. But it's kind of like the IKEA mentality that, I buy this product, I've solved my problem. And it's very, very unimaginative. And there is a very good reason why this word sedum roof is used, and it's to do with the commercial systems wanting to buy, mass produce, buy whatever they want. They're not wrong, but it's actually not that clever. And often the pre-grown ones are actually quite expensive. And putting a green roof up, and now I'm thinking of the person who may want to do that. She or he may want to do it because they just actually want a green roof. She or he might want to put it up because the other benefit of green roofs is, of course, they're great for wildlife if you do them well. And what we like to say to people is, look, if you're going to build a green roof, and you're going to invest your time, if you're doing it, and you're also going to invest some money, why not do it in a way that it's not instantly green, but it evolves in front of your eyes? Because what happens with people, if they grow with their green roof, they get used to the changes in climate. 2011, it was dry from February till May in southeast England, no rain, unprecedented, trees were going to fall down, yeah? Well, green roofs would have struggled. Then you're going to get August 2012, rain all summer, And so we try to say to people, look, try not to go for a product, try and go for a process that you can live with. And the thing is, if you keep the nutrients really, really low, even to 10%, the organic material, you watch that and you go, all right, I think I've had a little bit more organic material. Now, the problem is what a lot of people do is they have too much organic material. And once you've added too much organic material, you have to take the whole lot off. See? So it's always better to start with the least amount of organic material, because if you don't like it, you can add organic material. If you put too much organic material in, you've got to take everything off. And people in their desperate urgency to see success, it ends up being disappointing, because actually watching something grow is a much better way of coming to a really good green roof. And so I'm really appealing to your the kind of people who may listen to your podcast, because they're probably people who have an interest in building their own house, wanting to do things which are relatively within an environmental frame. Buying products off the shelf which give an instant glow, you will find that you will be doing a lot of maintenance down the years.
What do you mean by that? Products that...
Well, you can buy sort of instant blankets and instant meadows and instant things which are pre-grown, and you shove up there and you do what you do, yeah? And what we think in green roofs is much better. If you're in a self-build in Cornwall, we helped a guy do one in Sennan he bought our online guide, we helped him, he's a friend of John's, and we told him, go around the cliffs of Cornwall, pick all the flowers from the cliffs of Cornwall, throw them on your roof, yeah? Get local granite aggregate, because that's Land's End for you. Do that, shove it up there, you've got the right aggregate, you've got the right plants, You've got to make a reasonably local green roof. And it worked, Next door, somebody bought a sedum blanket and he's still going to us, well, he's got this instant green thing. I said, well, he irrigates it all the time. He has to fertilise it all the time. And yours looks natural. And so that's our attitude, is try. If you're going to do this, you want to be sustainable, why don't you make it regional, local? And you can buy wildflower seeds and you can buy wildflower plugs and you can buy those. And there's lots of good companies which do that. But I meet a lot of people who were never really as seriously into nature as I am, who have said to me, when you wrote in your guide, well, why don't you go out and collect some seeds of wildflowers that you like the look of and throw them up? He said, actually gave us a route into actually understanding our environment. And that's kind of far more interesting than going like, right, okay, I'll buy this thing, it was grown in Poland and apparently it works and, I'm satisfied by the products and it goes up and then 3 or 4 years later, there's a massive drought, and you're going, what have I bought?
You mentioned drought, and I think that is a key point with climate change. You look in California that's going through it. Is there ever a place that really they just should not bother with a green roof?
Well, it's not my view. We have another colleague we work with, Gary Grant. He did a lot of work on trying to persuade countries and cities in the Middle East, like Qatar and in Abu Dhabi, that actually what they really needed to think about is actually not having green roofs, as in bright green, is the desert, is to have what he called ephemeral desert roofs. So what you do is you use the right kind of substrate up there. And what happens in the desert, certainly in the wadis, when the rain does come, and it doesn't come very often, when it does come, is in the wadis, which are these stony sort of like river valleys, is where all the boulders are. You get all these plants. And I've been into these wadis and you get all these beautiful butterflies. And so the idea with that, using that context, is that maybe once every 4 weeks it's seeded with the plants of the desert. Every 4 weeks it's irrigated as if it rained. So it might not rain for 12 years, and these seeds are sitting there and it rains 12 years and all these flowers come up. So on the dry desert roof, is what you do is you maybe irrigate it once every 3 weeks. You get 2 weeks of this bloom. You get a week when it's not there. 2 weeks of the bloom. Now, in that context, that's really about biodiversity and also giving some colour for the person whose roof it is. But the green roof still works in terms of its thermal mass. It's still doing all the other sustainable things. But we're not manufacturing a system. A lot of the green roofs that are being put out in somewhere like the Middle East, they're Northern European systems which are being irrigated every day. People there, I suspect, think, that's what we need to achieve green roofs. And not far from there, relatively, halfway between the two, we have a colleague in Greece who's been making indigenous Greek green roofs, which are based upon a Greek mountainside, which he does irrigate some of them in sort of July, August, but some of them he doesn't. He says, well, actually, the Greek mountainside in July, August is not in bloom. And so it's this thing we have to sort of fight this culture that everything has to be green all the time. I happen to live in London on Blackheath. If you were to go to Blackheath over the last 4 weeks, and it happens this every year, I have friends all over the world who presume that England's green all the time. Well, actually, Blackheath is brown. It's always
not today,
brown.
though.
Not today. Well, it probably is, actually, but it's sort of grey-brown because of the rain. But, at the end of the day, our countryside in August is naturally brown. And this idea everything's got to be green all the time is this sort of strange thing. And on that, because you mentioned California, because we have friends from California, there's a very famous green roof there. And I met a guy who was actually from England. He said, oh, yeah, we've got one of those so-called green roofs. It's brown. Well, I was there in June, and I said, well, look, we was on a boat looking over California. This is San Francisco. I said, well, what colour is California? Well, he said, well, it's brown. I said, yeah, okay, what colour is it in January and December? He said, it's green. I said, what colour is the green roof in January and December? He said, it's green. I said, what colour is it at the moment? He said, it's brown. I said, yeah, because it's designed as a cascade mountain grassland community, which looks like that mountainside at the moment. But because it's on a building, people go, oh, hang on, it's on a building, therefore it's got to be green all the time. And it's, again, we kind of forcing our aspiration onto something then actually really naturally wants to do what it does, just like everything else naturally wants to do what it does. So we try to encourage people to fight that compulsion that we've been sort of almost bullied into. And things have their natural progression. And, to add to that, we're looking out the window here, my colleague John's house there. He built that 20 years ago. He used site soil from the footing, shoved it up because that's what he thought was a good idea then. And that's what John Broome, they thought it was a good idea. What happens is that gets very, very grass dominant, and it's now pretty brown at the moment. But what's interesting about using that roof as an example, depending on the climate, one year you might have oxide daisies all over the place. Next year it might be brown from April all the way through to September with a few sedums on the edge. And then about 3 years ago he was up there and he went, what are these? And he discovered that he's got a bee orchid colony up there. It appeared after 17 years. So the point there is there's no real right and wrong. I mean, the principle is try and keep the nutrients as low as possible. But what you've got to do is accept that the roof will go with the climate. And if you buy into that, actually it becomes interesting, because actually what it is, it's a dynamic situation. And the trouble is, in the built game, we always want everything that's static. My brick will not decay, my metal will not rust, but vegetation and soil changes.
That's definitely a point that I had never thought about, because you're right, green roof, well, what's the first thing that you expect from it? To be green, which I suppose is why living roof is a better description. Let's move on now and think about if we wanted to get this done for ourselves and we're looking to someone to do it. How do we go about it? Who do we know that we can trust, and so on?
Well, I mean, the problem currently is green roofs are a relatively mainstream industry now, but they're really mainstream, to be honest, for the big commercial jobs in our cities and in the built environment. And so there's very, very few small-scale green roofing companies in the country at a regional, town or district level. I mean, there are a few. There's a couple in Brighton, one in Oxford. The really good ones, they're not everywhere. So a building contractor, I'm sure, would love to do it, but they're generally, I suspect, will then go to like the Viking Manual or like, who's going to supply me this, so that this is what my client wants. And so you're getting something which is relatively generic, and it may not actually really be what you want. And so in a way, it's not the building contractor's fault and it's not the client's fault. It's actually just, it's disjointed. Yeah.
Is there a reason why this hasn't developed more, to have individual people who are specialists in this? Obviously it has in certain parts, perhaps where there's a big enough target market.
I think it's because it's not quite as mainstream as putting up a photovoltaic panel, or it's not mainstream like roofing felt or tiling. And so most building contractors, to be fair to them, they would normally, the garden would be the preserve the landscaping contractor, and I do the bricks and the mortar. The green roof is not bricks and mortar, it's plants and sand, and there's a building element. So you've got building contracting and landscape contracting interfacing over a roof edge, yeah. So, I mean, it's very difficult to advise people without promoting a certain activity that we've done, because we've written this online guide, which does cost money, which goes through every single step that you as a builder, self-build, can use, or you as the client can show to your builder, so that the decision can be made to do what you want. If your extension wants a roof light, there's a little bit about how you do the green roof with the roof light, and you've got a flue. And so the builder and the client can make the decisions that they want, and actually save money, and in many ways save money both for the client and for the builder, because the builder's not wasting money on expensive stuff. The client is saving money because you're not buying in expensive systems, and you can make decisions about saying, right, I'll make the roof stronger, I'll put the plywood deck on, and then I'll actually just source all these products locally. Essentially what you need the liner, you need a geotextile membrane, you need some substrates, you need some plants. Really, that's it.
Well, I found it fascinating. I think we have to round it off here. Anything you want to finish on? Anything that people get wrong, or a final thought?
Do it. Make sure you do it and you get everybody else in your street to do it, because it actually make our urban environments a much, much better place. And you'll get so much pleasure out of it. I mean, that's the thing. You build a house while you live in it, but actually when you look out of your bathroom every morning when you're cleaning your teeth, and every stage of the year you see this green roof and it changes. Most people I know put one in, go, the amount of pleasure I got, the money was well spent.
Dusty, thank you very much.
Not at all.
Access the show notes for this episode at houseplanninghelp.com/68. We've got the key points, photos of green roofs and under construction as well, links to Dusty, who has a huge following on Twitter. He's always very active on there. And of course, the resource, the guide that he mentioned. I'm not an affiliate for this and I haven't read it. I hope from the interview that you just heard, you can tell that he's a very genuine guy and has lots of valuable information to share. So go and take a look at that if you are someone who's wanting to go down the green roof path. One more announcement before we finish up. And a podcast that I really enjoy listening to about property investment is called The Property Podcast. I've mentioned it once before on the podcast. Hosts Rob and Rob, two Robs. And yesterday I went to one of their meetups, which was held at a pub in London. And it was incredible. It really got me thinking, actually. They not only filled out one level of this pub, the calibre of people who came along to this event, including also, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, one guy who was an app developer and clearly had a very big business, some apps that I've heard of before, doing very well, had a number of properties. I mention this because I think, why don't we try this with our community? We're all very passionate about this. We all want to build energy efficient homes. And whether you're a self-builder or someone who's an architect, or perhaps you've wanted to say hello, I just thought it'd be really good idea to try and make this happen. So another plan here at House Planning Help. I've got two locations that I want to do this year. One is London and the other is Sydney, Australia. That's right. I want to do one out there because I'm going there anyway and it makes sense. So it may be a slightly smaller meetup. I know our core market seems to be here in the UK, which of course is where most of our content comes from. But I do, when I go to Australia, want to see, well, what's going on here? Maybe I'll get some podcast episodes out of it. Who knows? So that comes soon and I'll let you know when we've got more information. Next time, my guest is Rory Bergin from HTA Architects, and we're going to find out about Active House, try and answer a question for Chris Mack. Thanks for listening. Catch up soon.